In this video, I'll give you a locals update on Oahu's latest reopening plan. What's open, what's not, and what are the next steps. It's something I've had a lot of friends and family living on the mainland and overseas ask me about, and subscribers as well. What's next for Oahu? The entire written plan for reopening the islands is comprehensive. The specific one, which I'm drawing all my information from, is about 20 to 30 pages. I'll leave links in the description box below if you'd like to read it yourself, or if you just want the highlights, keep on watching. I'll also leave timestamps in the description box below, so feel free to jump around to the parts of the video that you want to watch. First off, keep in mind that the city and county of Honolulu encompasses the entire island of Oahu. Sometimes it's referred to as simply the city or Honolulu, but it's not city specific, it's actually island specific. This is particularly important because I've had people ask me that if this is a Honolulu issue or a Honolulu mandate, if they were to go to, say, Haleiwa up on the North Shore, would the same rules apply? And the answer is yes. Again, city and county of Honolulu refers to the entire island of Oahu. Back in the day, it used to be called Oahu County, but now it's City and County of Honolulu. As a bit of background, Oahu has had 2 stay-at-home orders. The first one was back in March. It lasted for about a month from the end of March. The second one was the end of August until September 24th. Just last week is when it ended. There is also a weekend night curfew, the weekend of Good Friday. So in this video, I'll be talking about Oahu's latest reopening plan that starts September 24th and goes on till Halloween or October 31st. In this particular order, there's about 9 main sections. The first section says that you can leave your house, but only if you're going to essential businesses or designated businesses, everything that the order lists. Pretty much anything that's open, you can go to. If it's not open, you shouldn't be going there. Number 2, businesses should work on a bare bones staff. The minimum number of people required to keep things running until that particular business reopens again. Number 3, social gatherings are only limited to 5 people, and this assumes 5 people of different households. This is for places such as maybe like a lunchroom, if you're going to the beach with friends, if you're going hiking, things like that. Number 4, travel. Travel to and from the essential businesses or the designated businesses is completely allowed. If you are on public transportation, such as the bus, you have to wear a face covering. Number 5, there's a whole section that explains everything that you need to know about the face coverings. For face coverings, they're typically going to be the cloth masks that you can use. For face coverings, there's essentially 2 sets of rules, outdoors and indoors. If you're outdoors, you're required to wear a mask if socially distancing from someone by at least 6 feet isn't feasible. Indoors, you're required to wear a mask pretty much in any shared space, commercial or residential. So commercial, for example, would be in any of the stores that you go into, and then for the residential, if you're in the elevator of your building, for example, your apartment building, or if you're going into your lobby, you should also have a face covering. For indoor areas, it's pretty much anything that's not your house, you should have a face covering on. Of course, with face coverings, there are quite a few exceptions, and the order lists everything out. The main ones to note are for children under 5 years old, they're not required to wear a face covering. If you're, say, in a bank and then the teller needs to verify your identity, you can take your face covering off. If you have a medical condition, something that requires that you cannot wear a mask. If you are a first responder and having a mask hinders your safety for whatever reason, you obviously can take that off as well. So what is a face covering? As defined by the order, a face covering covers the nose and mouth. It's fabric and there are no holes, no one-way vents, any of that, and it ties on. You can make it yourself if you'd like, or if you prefer the store-bought ones, I have ones that I bought from Target for just $2. But again, it has to cover the nose and the mouth. The next part of the order talks about parks. If you'd like to go to the park, you can do so, but it has to be with a group of 5 people or less. Canopies are allowed in city parks, but the canopies have a size restriction of 10 foot by 10 foot, and the canopies have to be spaced at least 12 foot apart. You do have to have a permit to have these canopies at city parks, but the permit is free and you can do it completely online. I'll leave a link in the description box below for that as well. An example of a city park would be, say, Kapilani Park. For state parks, canopies are not allowed. An example of a state park would be He'ia State Park. If you're not sure if a park is a city park or a state park, I'll leave links and resources in the description box below. If you'd like to look it up, you can. The next part is going to be about beaches. I'm so glad that the beaches are finally open. In our most recent stay-at-home order, the first 2 weeks the beaches were completely closed, and then the latter 2 weeks the beaches were open for solo beachgoers only. For beaches, groups are limited to 5 people or less. No canopies are allowed, but you can have those umbrellas or sunshades, the smaller ones that are made for 3 people or less. The next part about the order talks about activities and restrictions for certain activities, such as singing or using wind instruments. And the reason for that is, with both of those activities, to reduce the propulsion of respiratory droplets in the air. So there's 2 different sets of rules whether you're outdoors or indoors. If you're outdoors, The performing group can be performing, but it has to be 5 people or less. And you have to be at least 10 feet away from the audience. If it's reasonable and practical, there should be some sort of physical barrier between the people who are singing or playing wind instruments and the spectators. That can be something as simple as like a plexiglass. For indoors, the same rules apply, except it's a little bit more strict. So for indoors, again, the group or the performer can be 5 people or less, and the audience or the spectators have to be 10 feet away, but a physical barrier such as plexiglass is required. And the last part of the order talks about shared indoor spaces. So this would be, say lunchroom, conference rooms, and so forth. Indoor spaces should be closed, and workers should be encouraged to use outdoor spaces instead. However, where it's impractical to do so and the indoor spaces have to be used, there are a few recommendations. First off, people need to be at least 6 feet apart, same as with all social distancing. Everyone must wear a face covering. There must be routine cleaning and disinfecting. It's also recommended to improve the circulation of airflow with fresh air by opening windows and doors. Now let's get into a little bit more detail. If you'd like the full description of everything that is allowed, I'll leave links in the description box below, but bear in mind this is just the highlights. First off, for indoor retail businesses, those are allowed to open, but their capacity is limited to 50%. As an example, I went to Whole Foods at Ward just the other day, and the way they were able to monitor that was there was a line with yellow pieces of tape to separate people to make sure they were at least 6 feet apart. There was a greeter at the door, and she was watching as people left from a different exit. As people were counted to leave, people could enter as well, which is how it's done in many stores. Second, if you're going into, say, a fitting room, fitting rooms are not allowed to be open. However, there are a few restrictions. The store is supposed to obviously clean and sanitize all the heavily touched objects, such as like the doorknob. And after an item has been tried on, it is required to be quarantined for 24 hours. The third part is going to be about pools. Outdoor pools can be open, however, indoor pools cannot. It's encouraged for facilities to use some sort of reservation system. That way there's not a ton of people at the pool at the same time. A friend of mine lives in a building in the Ward area, and that's how his pool works as well. There's a sign-up sheet, and then there's specific times that are allotted, and those are the times that certain patrons or certain guests can go. It's obviously different at every apartment building and how different places do it, but that's just an example of what one building does. It's also required to have face coverings anytime you're at the pool, except when you're actually physically in the water or you're showering. So what this means is if you're at an apartment, for example, with a pool area that has sun area or a sun deck or a lounge deck, when you're lounging at the pool and you're obviously not in the water, you'd have your face mask on. However, when you're swimming in the pool, you can take your face mask off. And now restaurants. This is probably one of my most favorite sections. I am excited and happy that restaurants are finally open on Oahu. Over the past few weeks, restaurants have been open, but only for takeout only with our most recent stay-at-home order. However, now restaurants are open. There are restrictions, however. First off, to be considered a restaurant, to apply to these rules, you have to have at least 30% of your gross sales in food. For employees, you have to wear face coverings at all times. For customers, you do too, except when you're actively eating or drinking. So this is really important to note because in our last set of instructions before, the restriction for face masks within restaurants was different. So in the past, you would have to wear your face covering when you're walking from the entrance of the restaurant until you sat at your table. And then once you sat down at your table, you could take your face mask off and keep it off for the entire duration of your meal. However, this time it is different. You keep your face mask on the entire time until you are actually served your food and while you're actually eating. When you're not eating or drinking, you must put your face mask on. I went to Richello at Nordstrom the other day, and that was actually enforced. We were reminded by our server a couple times of the new rules and restrictions. Our server was amazing, very kind and very obliging, but she also reminded us, hey, this is a new thing with the new order, and a lot of people don't realize this. So when you're at a restaurant and the waiter or the server tells you, hey, you have to have your face covering on, they're not trying to make your lives difficult. It's just the order is different than the previous order, which allowed you to keep your face mask off. As for dining, you can do so in groups of 5 or less. However, the 5 have to be from the same household or family. This is, of course, completely on the honor system. Also, when you go to the restaurants, you'll be asked to provide your name, phone number, and address of one person in the party for contact tracing. The restaurant will hold on to this information for no more than 28 days. And the reason why they do that is, of course, for contact tracing. As for your seating area, tables and chairs are to be sanitized between different groups. Menus are supposed to be cleaned after as well. Most restaurants are slowly turning into disposable menus, like the printable ones that can be disposed of after the group uses them. And a lot of restaurants are also turning to digital menus. Just the other day, I went to Duke's restaurant, and at Duke's, you were provided with a QR code where you could scan with your smartphone, and then that pulled up a link to a digital menu, so everything was on your own phone. You didn't have to touch any other menu. There are no buffets or self-serve stations. And lastly, for liquor, if you're interested in liquor, That is probably one of the bigger restrictions as well. Liquor stops at 10 o'clock, and that includes sales, service, consumption, everything. What I've noticed checking at different restaurants, a lot of restaurants that are open later in the evening, they'll typically do a last call at 9 p.m. because all liquor has to be out of the premises and off the tables by 10 o'clock. That gives you an hour, that way you can grab your drink, order, and still have everything done by 10. This is particularly important to note because I think some people think liquor stops at 10 so they can get there at 9:45 and still be able to order. However, unfortunately, that is not the case. Zoos, museums, and so forth are also open. However, I would highly recommend if you're planning on going to one of these places, definitely give that specific business a call first to find out the restricted hours, rules, and restrictions ahead of time. Outdoor commercial attractions, think water parks, mini golf, those are all open. Indoor commercial attractions are not open. So for that, think arcades. Bowling alleys are also open, but only at 50% capacity. As for boating, for personal recreational boating, that's if it's your own boat or you're on a boat of a friend's or things like that, groups are limited to 5 people or less. For commercial recreational boating, capacity is limited to 25%. So what does this mean? If you're familiar with the Waikiki area and you've seen those larger sunset sail catamarans going out in the water, some of the larger boats have a capacity of, say, 49 people. However, with this new restriction, they're limited to 25% of that, so only 12 people on the vessel. Hair salons and barber shops, as well as nail salons, are open, but with restrictions. Movie theaters are open, but only at 50% capacity. There is no food or drink served within the theater. So, what's next? What are the next steps for Honolulu? Honolulu has a 4-tier framework. Right now we're in tier 1, which is the starting line, and we're trying to get to tier 4, which is the finish line, or as close to a new normal as we can get. As we jump from a higher tier, from 1 to 2 or 2 to 3, more restrictions are relaxed and more things are open. But I was curious, how do you go from one tier to the next? So I checked the government website and this is how it works. 3 things are required. First off, you have to be in the current tier for at least 4 weeks. Second, you have to have less than a certain number of COVID positive cases. And third, you have to have less than a certain percentage of positive cases. Now these numbers, the daily case count as well as the percentage of positivity, are based on a 7-day average. So let's compare the tiers just to kind of see what we're looking at. In the first tier, you have more than 100 reported COVID cases per day. In the second tier, you have between 50 and 100 reported cases per day. In tier 3, you have 20 to 49 cases per day. And lastly, in tier 4, which is the finish line, you have less than 20 cases reported per day. So once you get to that first metric and you have a certain number of cases or less reported per day, you have to also do the second metric. The second metric is the percentage of positive tests for COVID. In tier 1, there's over 5% positivity. In tier 2, it's 2.5 to 5% positive. In tier 3, it's 1 to 2.49% positive. And lastly, tier 4, it's less than 1% positive. So that's a lot of information. What does that mean? Right now, we're in tier 1. Tier 1 means that we have over 100 reported cases of COVID per day, and it also means that we have 5% or higher positive cases of COVID. Those are the 2 metrics. In order for us to have more restrictions relaxed, we have to jump to tier 2. To get to tier 2, we have to have between 50 and 100 cases of COVID per day, or less of course, and we also have to have 2.5 to 5% positive cases per day, or less. Now keep in mind, once we jump from tier to tier, as more things get relaxed, it's not a one-way street. If there's a spike in COVID cases, we could easily jump from tier 3 and go all the way back down to tier 1, where more things would close. Based on what I read on the document, it said that if that were to happen, during the weekly assessments, there'll be a 3-day warning and then a new order will be released, stating to retreat and have more restrictions in a lower tier. So what's a tangible example of that? The tier system, tier 1, 2, 3, 4, like what does that really mean? Let's compare. The easiest item to compare for tier system is the amount of people you can have in a group. So in the lower tiers, tier 1 and tier 2, groups are limited to just 5 people. As things relax, in tier 3, we can have groups of 10 people. And lastly, in tier 4, we can have groups of 25 people. And in general, organized team sports are not even allowed until tier 4. So that's later on. Spectators are considered part of a social gathering. Keep in mind that these organized team sports excludes those that are associated with schools. Let's look at retail, for example. In tier 1 and tier 2, capacity within some stores is limited to just 50% of what their actual capacity is. It's not till tier 3 that those stores can open up with full capacity. The next thing to kind of compare is commercial boating. Let's say you wanted to go for a sunset sail, for example. In Tier 1 and Tier 2, the capacity of those vessels is going to be limited to 25% of what they can hold. So a sunset sail, for example, holds 49 people on one of the larger catamarans that you see here in Waikiki. Right now, for Tier 1 and Tier 2, those boats are able to take guests, however, they're limited to 25%. So if the sunset sail holds 49 people, they can only take 12 people total. It's not till Tier 3 and Tier 4 that capacity is bumped up to 50%. So that means in Tier 3 and Tier 4, a 49 passenger boat can take about 24-25 people. As for gyms can't open until Tier 2. And even with that, they're going to be at a 25% capacity. It's not going to be until Tier 3 or 4 that those gyms have a 50% capacity. And bars. Unfortunately, bars are completely closed for Tier 1, 2, and 3 and aren't even allowed to open until Tier 4. And even at Tier 4, that's going to be with restrictions. So what does that mean in terms of time frame? Assuming that you're in each tier for at least 1 month minimum, Tier 1 would be October, Tier 2 would be November, Tier 3 would be December, which means at the very, 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 very earliest, bars can't open until January. Same goes for nightclubs. Thank you so much for watching this video. That was a lot of information. And as I mentioned before, I'll put a bunch of links and resources in the description box below if you'd like to read a little bit more about the order. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and definitely hit that subscribe button for more Hawaii content. Feel free to leave me a comment and let me know what else you'd like to see.